Hey there guys, this is Shane from GamesBrained. Lately I've been on a real heavy Elder Scrolls kick, and I thought there'd be no better way to examine the series than to go back and look at the one that started it all 20 years ago, the Elder Scrolls I Arena. To give some context, in the same year Arena came out, Rare released Donkey Kong Country for the Super Nintendo, which is where I was gaming back then. While I think it's fairly easy to go back to action or platformer games from this era, intense RPGs like Arena are really difficult to go back to. So I wanted to give other modern gamers who are patient and curious enough to want to go back and experience it an idea of just what they'll be up against. After loading up Arena, you'll create your character with the choice of race, gender, class, and attribute points to distribute. Unlike all current Elder Scrolls games, there are no specific fighting or crafting skills to level up, so killing is all you'll do to level. When you're done creating your character, you'll receive a low-res and strangely voice-acted cutscene to set you on your way. Take a look.
In that act of arrogance, he has made his first mistake. Look to the north wall of the cell. You will find the ruby key which will unlock the door.
She's got an odd pause to her voice acting, but somehow I still find it charming, kind of like how the original intros to Resident Evil on the original PlayStation are still super entertaining. Like most Elder Scrolls games, you start in a prison, and the first challenge you'll face is the controls. Unfortunately, Arena does not use the now standard WASD controls, instead relying on the directional pad, and the awkwardness of this combined with the necessary mouse controls was something I could only barely adjust to. To make things worse, you cannot reset the controls. So once you're able to move around well enough, you'll find yourself greeted with one of the hardest openings to any game I can recall. Bethesda made this dungeon to be punishing, and while the lady in your dream gives you vague directions, it's still really easy to get lost and brutally killed before making any progress at all. Even if you know the exact route, you'll still find it a challenge, as by this point you'll likely have no way to heal other than to sleep, and when you sleep, monsters will come out that will kill you in a couple hits. This is where Arena lost me the first time I tried to play it, but this time I was determined to proceed. While this game is clearly from another time, I can't say that this excuses this part, as even other famously difficult games from before this time at least eased you into the action. Take for instance the original Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy, or even Ninja Gaiden on the NES. Even if you have a very low amount of skill or understanding of the game, you can still get past the first 10 minutes. This, I think, is the huge reason why so many players who have dipped their toe into this game out of curiosity have quit so soon after, and it's just an odd design choice. Still, when you finally make it out of that dungeon, your victory is so much sweeter. I can say it is honestly one of my biggest gaming milestones, and thankfully, the game becomes much more playable as soon as you escape. With the prison behind you, you are able to visit towns, follow quests, go shopping, and are as completely free as any other Elder Scrolls game. But, as you'll find out, that doesn't really mean much. All of Tamriel is open to you now, and despite the massive distances both inside and outside of the cities, you can really feel the age here, mixed with other odd design choices. To make up for the technology of the time and to give the game an epic feeling, all of the land in between cities is completely randomized and huge, which is unfortunate because the landscape is also entirely flat. There's no walking from town to town either, as every time you leave the city, the wilderness just goes on and on forever. You can only use the fast travel system to get from place to place, and there are hundreds of towns and cities to visit. While these are not randomized, they may as well be. Inside of each city, there are seemingly hundreds of NPCs to interact with, but they're little more than information booths. You really only interact with them in order to be guided to important landmarks around the city, like shops and castles. Some will mark the buildings on your map if you're close enough, but most of the time they will just tell you which direction to go, with no indication of how far. Since the cities are so big, you'll just need to blindly run in the direction they said until you decide it's far enough and talk to another NPC who will tell you if you need to keep going or not, and pretty much just rinse and repeat from that until you found your shop. This process is really tiresome, and unfortunately you'll need to do it every time you're in a new city to find every single new shop you're looking for. So really I just recommend sticking to one city that you can come back to again and again, just to save yourself a little bit of headache. Like the Elder Scrolls games that followed, you'll have the main quest, which is always present, but there are plenty of side quests to do. Unfortunately, the side quests are also randomly generated, except for a small number of very rare artifact quests. Other than these few special quests, the side quests will never have anything to do with things outside of the cities. One quest had me going to another city to retrieve an item from the king, and then return it back to the quest giver. Another quest had me do the same thing, only in the same town. Another quest had me do the same thing as the first quest. Each of them paid a very small amount of money for my time spent wandering, which made it even more annoying when I had to do the same tiring task of finding specific shops in another city by following the NPC directions again. These quests are basically just busy work, and since the main quest sends you directly to dungeons filled with monsters and treasure, you may as well skip these unless you're hoping to find the extremely rare artifact hunting quests. When you get to the dungeons, you'll find that the combat doesn't really have much to it. You just waggle your weapon at an enemy until they fall, occasionally drinking a potion or casting a spell to attack, heal, or buff yourself. This part I didn't mind actually, because this really just makes it feel like a modern roguelike. To further cement the comparison, the dungeons are all labyrinths, and the default view distance in these dark places makes it miserable to explore them. If you're a magic user, the Cast Light spell will be your best friend, and it made exploring these dungeons at least tolerable for me. Either way, I recommend you pair up with an online dungeon map if you want any chance of getting through without hours and hours of frustration. Saving, and saving often, is also your best friend here. Death comes quickly, and even simple enemies, especially spellcasters, will machine gun spells at you so fast and without end that you could die in a few seconds, just by rounding a corner. While I had started this game with high hopes of finally completing the very first Elder Scrolls game, I only made it about halfway through the main quest before I just had to give up. You'll end up visiting all of the provinces of Tamriel. Each one has 2 dungeon crawls to go through, and as these were taking me 1 to 2 hours each, which was with the assistance of a map by the way, the grind was definitely getting to me. As a gamer who still enjoys JRPGs, a little grind doesn't really bother me, and I love simple experiences that I can boot up while I play a little music or listen to a podcast and make progress. However, this game made me have to stop with the unforgiving deaths, clunky controls, and frustrating exploration. I just had to give it a rest. Every new city was pointless and frustrating, as I had to constantly research for new shops or other important buildings in each one. Each dungeon was basically interchangeable with horribly frustrating view distances and places that were just winding mazes. So in the end, I couldn't make it. The only thing I really enjoyed was browsing through the Tamriel map and seeing how the original landscape of Tamriel was designed 20 years ago. Playing Arena for as much as I did also made me curious about its own first sequel, The Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall. I imagine Daggerfall should hold up better as you can adjust it to control like a modern first-person Elder Scrolls game, and it has a bigger focus on the story than the original. Still, that's an examination for another day. Maybe someday I'll go back and finish Arena. Or maybe I'll just play more Elder Scrolls Online.